Let me tell you why Navia's story is an absolute masterpiece. If we really think about it, yes, we can feel sympathetic for her because of all the crazy things she's experienced, but it's also because of the fact that I just cannot comprehend or understand the emotional fortitude that she has in the entire story. Now, because we are talking about Navia, we cannot not talk about Melus and Silver. It is, of course, very sad and borderline depressing that Melus and Silver met their unfortunate end. And specifically for Navia, because within Spina di Rosula, Melus and Silver was basically like family to her. Now, within the story quest of Navia, they constantly mentioned Melus and Silver, and for some reason, it made me feel very unsettled or uneasy, uncomfortable, and I was trying to figure out why. Because let's be honest, in the past, we've had NPCs in the game that died due to unfortunate circumstances. And even though it's sad, it seems like Navia has accepted the fact that Melus and Silver are no longer with her. So my conclusion was, maybe, like a lot of players, I would assume, I can't accept it. It sucks. I want them back. But they're not coming back. Now, here's what's the crazy part about all this. I sat down and really thought about this, regardless of how I felt. And in a weird way, even though it's sad for me to say it, Melus and Silver dying actually was helpful and beneficial for Navia in the overall scope of things. It's not to say that Navia wasn't already a phenomenal leader from the very beginning, but essentially Melus and Silver's death accelerated the development and maturity level of Navia to like an unfathomable degree. And this is something that I find really inspiring because how is she able to bounce back so quickly? Is she even human? How is she able to stay sane? If anything, the biggest thing that I took away from this whole idea was the fact that she's just a very inspiring character. And it was really nice to experience this in the game because I truly felt connected emotionally to Navia. And I think the storytelling of Fontaine actually did get a lot better. Maybe that has something to do with why I felt so close to Melus and Silver as well, as opposed to other NPCs in the past. Now let's talk about the second reason why I feel that Navia is such a good character. Throughout the Archon quest, and even her story quest, she's constantly faced with people who essentially backstabs her and takes advantage of her goodwill. Marcel or Vache literally backstabbing Spina di Rosula. We have Coulter from the story quest. This guy, I hate this guy. Like, bro, stop gaslighting. And we also have Romeo, who essentially took advantage of Navia's goodwill within the story quest. Now, on top of trying to help out the people at Poisson and all the craziness between Melus and Silver, Navia now also has to deal with this on the emotional level. And the insane part about this is the fact that none of these things have anything to do with Navia, and it has everything to do with her dad. So in a way, I find it really, how do I put this? Unfair for Navia. It's not even her fault. All she's doing is basically trying to make things better for everybody, and everybody seems to hate her for some reason. But throughout this whole situation, there is one thing that constantly shows up, and that is the fact that Navia is very strong-willed and very responsible and is able to keep moving forward. Again, I don't understand how this person is a human. How is she able to control her emotions and stay sane? Now, there are instances where it seeps out a little bit, and that kind of makes her more relatable. Like, she freaks out and then she ends up crying here and there, but still, she continues to move forward, which is insane to me. Now, speaking of Callus, let's talk about the relationship between Navia and her parents. In the game, Navia constantly mentions that Callus was somebody that used to be very stubborn, and it was impossible to change his mind on a lot of the things. So on one hand, you can kind of feel that Navia has some reservation towards her dad, and then the other hand, she also knows all the good things that Callus did for the people around her in the Spina di Rosula and the Poisson and everything included. So for Navia, I would assume this is very complicated because as she was growing up, she had to kind of understand who Callus was through the perception of the other people around her and people that was within the family. Rather than having a direct conversation with Callus, I would assume since he was very stubborn, he also had hard time trying to express his emotions. Now I think about it, Navia has nothing but like unfortunate circumstances around her from like everything. But then the crazy part is she makes good out of it. She stays positive. How is she able to be optimistic? I don't understand. Now let's also talk about her mother, Clementine. Obviously, Clementine passed away giving birth to Navia, so they didn't really have an interaction between each other. But there was one thing that she did left behind, a little booklet. If we dig into the story of Navia, it explains a booklet left behind by Clementine that was given to Callus, and Callus withholds giving it to Navia until she grows up later in life. And interestingly, the book is basically a journal of Clementine thinking about all the things that Navia would grow up to be. But in the end, it does add that her mother just wanted good wishes for Navia, and it was just her own thoughts, and she kind of wishes Navia to grow up and become herself and not let other things affect how she wants to be when she grows up. And through Navia's story quest, we learned that Clementine was somebody that was very caring, but it is very unfortunate that Navia never had the opportunity to experience the relationship between her and her mother. Now, as I was recording this video, I kind of realized that I'm basically trauma dumping for Navia. That's not the intent of this video. I am basically showcasing all the crazy shenanigans and hardships that she had to endure and go through, and somehow at the end she's still able to be this positive, optimistic person. Even though she has frustrations and emotional struggles, she's able to stay happy. This is crazy to me. And this is probably the reason why I feel like she's one of the best written characters in the entire game, because throughout the entire journey of Navia, I was able to feel all these things and like understands what she feels, but still be like in awe and inspired. It's pretty insane. Now, here are some interesting things that I realized about Navia that maybe I'm overthinking, but within Navia's story quest, she showcases that she would often forget little notes that she writes for herself. And then there's one sequence where she has the fishing lines, but then she forgets to add a hook at the end of her fishing line. We can easily assume that she has these characteristics because she's a little bit absent-minded. But in my perspective, it's probably because she has so much responsibilities that like it's overwhelming. She has so much responsibility and so busy and literally so much on the table that's these small instances where she forgets some things. I think it's very endearing. I think it's cute, but I understand why it could be possible. Maybe I'm overthinking it. I don't know. You let me know. Also, another interesting lore that I suspect is the names of the Aquabus lines. Now, I completely forgot that these Aquabus lines in Fontaine were actually named after Navia and her parents. Now, the Clementine line goes towards Poisson, and then the Callus line was broken that's going north. And then there's the Navia line that goes to the Fountain of Lucine. Now, the cool thing is, in the book that Clementine gave to Callus that we mentioned earlier, in the beginning it describes how Clementine and Callus visited the Fountain of Lucine, especially when they were thinking about having a child, Navia. Maybe I am overthinking it, but it is very cool that the Navia line actually heads towards the Fountain of Lucine. Now, overall, when it comes to Navia in general, as I mentioned, I think she's a phenomenal character, especially being able to be grounded through all the emotional hardships that she's went through in her life. But again, as I mentioned before, it's hard to wrap my head around her. How is it possible? She is a human. We've seen instances where she shows emotions, but how is this possible? Again, very inspiring, very appreciative of this character, and I think they did a really good job. Genshin Impact did a really good job writing the story for Navia, and it's probably one of the best ones that I played. The story quest, best character that I've seen in terms of story writing, and I hope this continues in the future Genshin Impact.